he said, no, that's not the end of the story. The end of the story is that when you make a joke to Americans, they say that's funny. And I thought about it and I thought, we do, you're right. I thought, and I said to him, oh, you're right. We laugh and we say that's funny. And he said, no, I've learned the laughing is optional.
What would happen if we just told the truth?
Welcome to Truth Works, where we dig into the nitty-gritty of leadership and work.
And what needs to change. I'm Jessica Neal.
And I'm Patty McCord.
Our journey together started in HR, but trust us, it's evolved into something wild, honest, and well, a bit rebellious.
So throw out the handbook. We're here to redefine rules to work for us, not against us.
Let's dive into another episode. Today, we are speaking with one of my favorite people in the entire world. I don't know. She's incredibly famous for writing this book that I think tons of people have read called The Culture Map. Her name is Erin Meyer, and she's a professor at INSEAD. It's a leading international business school. Erin is a professor there, but she spent a lot of time with us at Netflix. And how we got to know her was that we were obsessed with her book, The Culture Map, and made everyone in the company read it. And then Reed emailed her, I think, one day and was like, can you come teach us how to do this? She did. And then we became good friends. And then she ended up writing a book about Netflix, which she and I spent lots of hours talking about. And now she's here to enlighten us with some things that are going on in the world today, because we have these big, huge distributed workforces that are global. And we just want to get her thoughts on all of that. I know you have many more accomplishments. Did I get it all right?
That was perfect. Thanks, Jessica. So nice to be here with you and Patty again.
And I was telling you earlier, I was watching all your videos leading up to this and how impressed I am with your stage presence. And you told me something that I didn't know about you, that you really love that. You love being on stage.
Oh, yeah. Well, what surprises people is when I tell them what an introvert I am, because it is true that besides being alone writing, my favorite thing to do is be on a big stage. I just think there's nothing more fun than being in front of lots and lots of people laughing together. I mean, gosh, the energy that you can take away from that. Yeah, that's my favorite thing.
I always feel like I have an out of body experience. Like I don't even know where I am. I'm just like on there doing it and saying it. But I feel like my heart's going to come out of my chest every time. So I admire that doesn't happen to you.
Yeah, but I've been doing that since I was really young. You maybe remember from the Culture Map, but my first job when I was 20 was that I went into the Peace Corps, right? And I was teaching classes. Maybe I had just turned 21. And the crazy thing about the Peace Corps is they let you do things that you would never be allowed to do in the US. And for me, that was at age 21 that I was teaching these like back-to-back 90-minute classes of 40 to 50 high school students. And so that was like at that time, yeah, really like crazy, trying to figure out how to get people's attention and how to figure out how I was going to stand up in front of all those people. But so I would say by the time I was 25, I had kind of gotten over the part of being scared by it. And then it just started being more and more fun. And you might think that standing up in front of, like I was in Botswana, in front of 50 African high school students is less scary than standing up in front of, 3,000 executives. But I can tell you, actually, it's a lot more difficult.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I did a talk at a women's conference once, and it was a Girls Who Code. And I went in and I'm in the background waiting to go up, and everybody's like 25 or 30. I mean, they're all really young. And I thought, oh my God, what do I have to say to these people? And it was wonderful because they were so eager to say, it was a place where that stupid cliche question really mattered. What would you tell your younger self? How would you rethink it? But I was thinking, as you were talking about being on stage, I've been on stage a lot too since I've left the company. And for me, one of the big hard things about the pandemic was losing that energy. Right. And I remember the first time, well, we paid you for the keynote, so can you go ahead and do it? And I thought, I'm going to talk for 45 minutes to my own face. I mean, it was just weird. So how has, without that energy, like going away during all of our virtual work and coming back, what have you learned about it? And what have you seen kind of across the world about everybody playing remote workforce instead of just a few people, and how that's come back together and how you see it growing in the future?
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, as someone who studies national cultural differences in the workplace, that was the most surprising thing that happened. I mean, not COVID, of course, that surprised everybody, but the fact that now that we were all alone in our own spaces, that we suddenly were spending so much more time with people in other countries. And what I mean by that is, right, you remember that, Jessica, right? Because it was like up until then, of course, everyone was kind of favoring being with people that they could be with physically. So like here at the business school I teach at, we have a Paris campus. So I'm on the Paris campus, and then we have a Singapore campus and Abu Dhabi campus. And we were all always with people from our own campuses, except for once in a while. But then during COVID, of course, it put us all at this kind of equal footing. So suddenly we were just all together on the screen. And I think that was fascinating. It was like suddenly we were alone. But I think this is true for most executives who work at, or managers who work in international companies. We were alone, but suddenly we were communicating a lot more with people from other countries. So it's actually, I mean, like Jessica, you were just talking very generously about my Culture Map book, which came out in 2014. But that book just took off during the pandemic. Well, that it sold way, way, way more copies. And it's like people who, until that point, they were just working mostly with people from their own country. Suddenly were like, oh my gosh, I have people from all over the world on my screen.
Yeah.
And I have to figure out how to deal with it.
Erin, can you tell everybody a little bit about Culture Map and what it is?
Yeah. So I have this methodology that breaks culture down into 8 behavioral scales. So we look at things like, how do we build trust differently in different countries, or how do we make decisions differently in different parts of the world? And then through about 180,000 interviews that we've conducted in about 64 countries, we have these countries that are positioned up and down the scales. And then you can map cultures up next to one another. So like on one scale, like one of the scales looks at a direct negative feedback cultures to indirect negative feedback cultures. So you could map up, like, let's say, Brazilian business culture up to French business culture. And you would see, oh, on that scale, French are much more direct with negative feedback than Brazilians. And then you could look at another scale and say, oh, Brazilians are much more relationship oriented than French people are, although French people are still towards the relationship oriented side of the scale. So, so then that mapping allows you to kind of really think in your international discussions, like what's cultural and what's personal, what's about the individual and what's cultural about what's going on. And I think that helps people to be both more empathic and also more strategic in their interactions.
And we had to rethink all of our structures. What was interesting to me was, when I'd go do a talk, at the end, everybody would come up and talk to me and say, oh, we wish we could do the things that you did in the Netflix culture, but we can't because we're in France. We can't because we're regulated. We can't because our boss won't let us. We can't because, we couldn't possibly work remotely, right? And then in 48 hours, the entire world was working remotely. And then people would say to me, who's doing it right? Who's got best practices? And I was like, nobody. We're all making it up. So, I mean, it not only the interesting part of all the cultures in the room, but in your book too, there's parts about like meeting structure is different in different countries and the way leaders interact in different countries. And remember the part where all your meetings were just 15 squares? on the screen.
still.
And I
Yeah.
remember somebody, a CEO, telling me that the beautiful thing was everybody's square was equal. So when he asked for a question, he'd get a really great question. He'd ask, later, who was that person? Oh, that's a person that's 5 levels down from you. But he never thought of him as an equal when he stood up on stage at a meeting.
Yeah. And actually, Patty, that's really interesting because you were talking earlier about how painful it was to moving from like in-person presentation to virtual presentation. I also teach, of course, at a business school. So I'm not always just giving a keynote. Sometimes I'm working for hours with people. And I've actually really come to enjoy doing those in a virtual platform because it allows me to get much more balanced participation from participants than I can when I'm in a class. So that happens because about 3 primary cultural reasons. Some cultures talk a lot more than others do, right? So for example, Americans, you guys may know, but Americans are known around the world for just taking up a lot of space in meetings. And even Europeans, right? Europeans are like a lot more talkative than Asians are in meetings, but even Europeans say to me, like, why do Americans talk so much? And I think that
Why, Erin? Why do we?
Why do we?
I'll tell you.
Wait. I have something to say. Wait.
But I really think that has to do with the participation grade that we had in school. We are one of the only countries in the world that has this idea that children will be graded based on how much they speak up. And, I don't know what you guys think, but I believe in the US, it's really not like, you don't get the extra credit because of the content of what you said or the quality of the content. You get the extra credit because you spoke up. And almost no other country in the world has that kind of grading system. So, I remember in school, I almost had my hand raised even before I knew what the question was. But in other countries, even here in France, it's like no one's going to speak up in class unless they have something smart to say. Because if they speak up and they say something stupid or unthought through, the teacher is going to embarrass them in front of the class. Because you don't want to waste people's time if you don't have something smart to say. So, okay. And then there are other things like just simple things like comfort with silence. Like in Asia, where people are really taught, the best communicators are ones who I listen, and then I pause, and then I respond. Versus in, of course, the US, we're like just waiting for a breath so we can jump in, right? So of course, when we're all together then from different countries, like in my classrooms when I'm at INSEAD, if I allow a classroom where people are just jumping in, then the Americans and the Europeans also are totally dominating, and it's hard for me to even hear the voice of people who come from let's say less cultures where people are less encouraged to speak up. And that's why I love the virtual platform, because the virtual platform, first of all, we've got the electronic hand, right? And the electronic hand you can raise in order, and you see the order of the hand raised. But also, like, you can mind read with virtual platforms that, I'll ask a question and I'll say, okay, all 42 of you put an answer into the chat box. And then we choose the most interesting answers to explain, versus, of course, when you're in the classroom, only the people who are the most come from those countries end up taking over. So that's something I love. That's something I love about virtual teamwork.
Yeah, we experienced that, as well. At Netflix, because as you know, we had people all over the world, and it did make things more equal. But there's also, I think, a con to the virtual world. And I really love to hear, Erin, like, how do you think in terms of companies being more distributed, and now, that it's virtual, people can hire people from anywhere all over the world. So you have, these companies who have people in, 10, 12 different countries, right? But now they haven't met and likely will never meet in person. And do you see that cultural, I don't know what the right word is, like difference maybe, or people not being aware of the difference. Do you see that permeating more in terms of it being a wider gap in understanding the difference? Or do you see it coming together a little bit more?
Yeah. So let's say I have actually three kind of points about that. But the first is that one of the things that happened during the pandemic and is now still happening is that, like, up until that time, most people who were working internationally also were international business travelers, right? Like the two of you, I know you were traveling all over the world. When I worked with you, Jessica, and Patty, of course, you've been doing that forever. So when you go to a country, and when you're traveling a lot, you already start to get cues about what's cultural and what's not, right? Like, oh, everyone's doing that here. Like, I mean, let's take a simple example, but like, okay, I was in India a couple of weeks ago, and in southern India, especially, the Indians have this way of moving their head, which is not like a front nod or a shake. It's a side to side. And it looks to us in Western countries like a no, but it actually means I'm listening to you. Or sometimes it can be a very enthusiastic, I love what you're saying. So if you go to India, let's say you go to southern India, especially, everyone's doing that. So you get, oh, okay, that means something else here. But now, okay, so now with the pandemic, suddenly all these people who don't travel internationally are in contact with people from other parts of the world. And I know that, I mean, that's happening in all international companies. Like, I don't have to travel. I do it all from my desk. So now I've got someone from India moving their head from side to side on the screen. And I think, well, why is that person constantly negating me? Because I don't have a sense that there's a cultural element to it, right? And that's, of course, just one example of how this happens all over the place. So that's like clearly one thing that happened. But I think there's some other things, Jessica, on what you were saying. Like, one of them is, so as you know, one of my dimensions, one of the things I look at is how we build trust in different cultures. And we'll keep it simple. There's what we call cognitive trust. So that's trust from your brain. Like, I see you are on time, you could do good work, you're reliable, I trust you. And then there's affective trust. That's like trust from your heart. Like, I feel this emotional connection or this personal bond with you. I've seen who you are inside, so I trust you. In many countries, like in the US, we tend to try to kind of separate cognitive trust from affective trust in a work environment. Like at home, okay, it's all affective, but work environment, we don't want to get too close to the people we work with, because we almost feel in the US, we kind of have this notion like that leads us to not make good business decisions anymore, right? So we want to be really friendly, but not get too close. And then there's many other countries in the world. I mean, to get us started, every emerging market country where we can really see that those affective bonds, those deep affective bonds, really drive the whole business landscape. So of course, then the countries who were more relationship oriented, they really suffered a lot during this move to virtual work. And I still see that today, that working for American companies, there's a tendency to now be like, well, why do we even need to go there? We're doing fine over the screen. Okay, great. But if we don't have the trust, it's hard to get work done. So I think the lesson from that is, if you are working internationally and you can go, do go. And when you do go, invest the time, not in, having more meetings, but instead of like going out, sharing lunches, laughing together, getting to know one another personally. And then when you go back to the screen, things work a little bit better.
It's so interesting that you say that, Jessica. I'm thinking about these are the same ways we describe emerging companies, right? So startup cultures anywhere in the world have that similar, it feels like a family, you do everything together, everybody puts their hat in the ring, that. So it's interesting that emerging countries are similar to emerging companies. Right. And then there's a certain inflection point where you get to scale and complexity where someone in the company in charge, usually board members, say it's time to grow up and put some distance in there. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and that's actually interesting, because the reason that emerging market countries are all to the relationship-oriented side of the scale, or one of the reasons in any case, has to do with the lack of reliability of the institutions, right? So, of course, if I am in Switzerland or the US, definitely, it's very easy to do business with strangers. So, because the legal system is like fast, efficient, reliable, it's been like that for a long time. So, I don't know you at all, but you've got a product I like. So, we just sign a contract. And if I don't get my money, I'll just use the courts and the institutions to get it. But if I come from Nigeria and I don't trust the legal systems, they're slow. I'm not going to waste my time trying to use that lever. I just have learned historically it doesn't work. So what am I going to do? I'm going to invest in getting to know the people before I work with them, or I'm going to use my personal network. Like my sister tells me that I can trust him. I had this guy from Senegal in my class. He said, I only hire somebody once I've met their mother.
Actually, that's pretty good advice.
Yeah.
I thought so. At first I was surprised. I was like, oh, you need to meet their mother? And he said to the class, well, of course, because once you've met their mother, then you know any problem you have, you know where to go to sort it out. And I thought, yeah, we should all do that.
I like it.
Can you guys, you two in human resources, can you imagine the backlash in the US? Do you mind if I call your mom?
Yeah. Well, I've had parents call me.
Me too, and come in and come in for the final interview. Yeah. Like I have a few questions for you
for very, very young people, right? Like college age students,
like sort of out of college. But we had let this woman go at one of the companies I worked for, and her dad called me the next day and was like, "I think you've made a big mistake." And I was like,
who are you?
I'm like,
Mr. Sorensen?
I was like, well, I know you love your daughter, sir, and she is a very good person. However, she did not do this job very well. And, and I know she's going to find something great that she's excited about, but it's just not, not here. And he's like, well, I know so-and-so on the board and, you'll be getting a call. I was like, okay.
Although I will tell you, Jessica, that once I had my mother come in, I was thinking that's who told me that. I never told that story before, but when I was in college, I had a summer job waitressing at a restaurant, and the owner was really a bully. Like he was stealing one of the waitress's tips. In any case, at one point, for some reason or other, he cut me back. He just put the schedule out, and I had no hours. I was so upset. My mom was so mad. My mom was like, "I'm going to go talk to that guy," and she did.
And then what happened?
I got my hours back.
Interesting now that we're moms.
I would too, Patty. My son's 18. I would. He's going to have to be like, Mom, stay away.
I got my son an interview at Netflix in LA. And I forget who he interviewed with, but he goes, Mom, that chick's my kryptonite. She's one of those MBAs that has her degree in math. They're scary. I said, how'd he do? She's like, he sucked. He really sucked. It was terrible.
But look at him now. He's so successful.
And he's successful. It's interesting because my son has always worked remotely. He's always had a very, very diverse group of people. He's a manager now, or director or something like that. But I get to see him work because I'm with him when he's at work, right? And he listens really well. That's his secret to great working remotely. And he goes around the grid and says, hey, Erin, we haven't heard from you. Do you have anything to add to this conversation? And he's taught himself how to pick out to make sure that everybody's involved. And I think that's because literally most of his working life has been remote.
Yeah. So, Erin, you have the best stories and examples of things. So I would like, you don't have to name the company or what, but I would like an example of someone who's doing this really well and, at a sort of global level, and someone or an organization that's not doing so well, and maybe the why behind both.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I have a specific company to highlight, but I will say that overall, I mean, it continues to shock me how little the majority of companies who are working internationally have any idea about these things. I mean, it's just amazing. It amazes me that, people like leading big multinational companies, everyone every day on with people from all over the world on the screens, yet they don't know, that in that culture, decisions are made by consensus. And that's why decisions are taking so long. And that culture, that culture, the time orientation is different. And that's why things are working in a way that's frustrating me so much. So, I mean, that's I think the number one thing that amazes me. And then the other thing that I will say is that with the whole diversity movement, I think there's been a new awareness that, like what generally happens in American companies with this huge focus on diversity right now is, okay, first we're going to focus on gender diversity, and then on racial diversity, and then on sexual orientation, and then whatever. And then suddenly, eventually someone is like, oh, wait, what about the fact that we come from all over the world?
Yeah, right. That's right. Yeah.
And then they're like, oh, yeah, maybe we should talk about that too. So that's I think been fabulous, but I don't think personally, I never think about it on a company level. I just think about it on an individual level. Like what was so fabulous at Netflix when you guys got this started was that Reed from the top was really, was reading that book and talking with me about it all the time and then asking everyone to read it. And of course, when that happens, then the knowledge gets disseminated. If it's just someone from a lower level in the company, then of course that helps that person with their career, but doesn't have an impact on the organization. But I think, Jessica, since you said you like stories, I want to tell you one other story. So this is a story since after the culture map came out, but also shows a little bit about how difficult it is today when we're working in these virtual environments. So I had this situation in Tokyo. It was that was actually right before the pandemic broke out, and I gave a presentation to a group of Japanese people. And at the end, I asked if there were any questions, and no one raised their hand. And okay, I was familiar with that happening in Japan, but I was disappointed and I went to sit down. So my Japanese colleague who was traveling with me from INSEAD came up and she kind of whispered in my ear, Erin, I do think there were some questions. Would you like me to try? And I said, yes, please. So she stood up and she said to the group, Professor Meyer has just spoken with you. Do you have any questions? No one raised their hand. But then she stopped and she kind of silently looked around the room. And then she gestured to someone who was sitting there, from my perspective, motionless. And she said to the guy, do you have a question? And he sat up straight. Oh, thank you. I do. And he asked a fascinating question. So she did that 3 more times. And afterwards, I said, at dinner that night, I said to her, but I really need to understand, how did you know that those people had questions? And she said it had to do with how bright their eyes were. So I thought, of course, I was like, what? I thought, for me coming from Minnesota, how do I use that information? But then she said, well, look, in Japan, we don't make as much direct eye contact as you do in the West. So when you ask the group if there were any questions, most people aren't looking right at you. They're looking somewhere else. But I noticed that a couple people in the room were looking right at you and their eyes were bright, signifying they would be happy to have you call on them if you want to. So I got that. So the next day I gave another presentation. Again, I asked if there were questions. Again, no one raised their hand. And that time I said, okay, Erin, just do what you saw. So I did what she had done, and I tried to do what she had done. I stopped and I just silently looked around the room. Okay, people were not looking at me. She was right. And as I looked around the room, one of the women kind of grabbed me with her eyes, right? She looked right into my eyes and she held my gaze. Now, were her eyes bright? I don't know, but I thought, well, maybe that's it. So I made a small gesture with my hand. She nodded her head. I said, "Do you have a question?" She asked a fascinating question. So I think the lesson is that it's very hard to read bright eyes when we are on a screen like this, right? And it, like, when people are telling you all sorts of things with their body language, and especially in what I call high context cultures where we tend to pass unlike the US, cultures like Latin cultures or African cultures, or even more so Asian cultures, where there tends to be a lot of unspoken meaning that really needs to be understood by close observation. So of course, it's very hard to get that when we've got just the voice and everyone's looking in the wrong place anyhow.
Mm-hmm. That's a really great observation. Yeah.
Erin, one last thing maybe you can help our listeners with is I always found this fascinating about the culture map, but it's like high context, low context. Do you want to talk about what that means a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, low context cultures are cultures where we believe good communication is very simple and clear and explicit. And the US is a clear example of that. Oh, actually, I have a funny new example from I'm still laughing about it, from one of my students last week. So in low context cultures, we are really trained to spell things out. Versus in high context cultures where we pass a lot of messages between the lines and we pick up unspoken messages. So we were just talking about Japan, but Japan is a very strong high context culture. There's an expression in Japanese, which is kuki yomenai. It means someone who is unable to read the air. So of course, in Japan, a good communicator can pick up all the unspoken messages, and then a poor communicator is unable to. They are kuki yomenai. And there's some other examples, like, I mean, I live in France. As you know, my husband is French. My kids have told me they are French. But that's true. Like in France, there's an expression which is a sous-entendu, and that means don't listen to what I said, listen to what I meant. Don't listen to the words I passed, listen to the message someone passed between the lines. So the US is the lowest context culture in the world. And I believe that's because we are a culture of immigrants. Because we're a culture where people come from many other countries, we didn't really learn together how to read implicit messages. So we have to simplify all of our messages and spell them out. And I just had this funny example because often I say to British people who are much more high context than Americans, often I say, like when you're in the UK, I was just in London, people are always making jokes and I think it's a joke, but I don't dare laugh because I'm not sure. So I'm always saying, if you could please do what we do in the US when we make a joke at work, which is we put a label on it, right? We make the joke and then we say, just kidding. And of course they don't like to do that. So I was just in Barcelona last week and I gave this same example. And there was this Italian guy living in the US in the room. And he said, no, that's not the end of the story. The end of the story is that when you make a joke to Americans, they say, that's funny. And I thought about it and I thought, we do, you're right. And I said to him, oh, you're right. We laugh and we say that's funny. And he said, no, I've learned the laughing is optional.
That's true. That's true.
And I thought, you're right. You can laugh or not laugh, but you say it's funny.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. That is so funny.
And that's what I love about all of this. It's like there's nothing more interesting than learning from other cultures about how weird your own behavior is.
Yeah. I think dad jokes are uniquely American.
Yeah.
Right. Those are the dad jokes.
And bad.
And
they're bad.
But those are the ones where you're not laughing and you go, that's funny. Actually, that's funny.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, that's funny. Okay, so it's time for career confessions. Erin, will you, sort of enlighten us with a perspective? We get questions from listeners, and we're going to read it off, and then you and me and Patty are going to discuss it and maybe share some advice or thoughts.
Okay, let's do it.
So, the team culture of my new job makes me feel lonely. I'm used to working remotely and have never experienced downsides before. In the past, I've always worked with great teams that chat throughout the day, say good morning, goodbye, send memes, etc. It felt really like being part of an actual team. But my new job has no small talk whatsoever. It's all work. People clock in, do the work, clock out, and don't message others unless it's essential. There's no casual chats, etc. Is this normal? I'm finding it difficult. I need a bestie to bounce off and reassure me, I guess. I tried having some one-on-ones with other team members, and apparently that was unusual for them. Will it get better, or should I just accept the solitude?
Oh, that's so interesting. I'm working on an article right now. I was just doing that this morning on talking about developing your organizational or team culture. And I do think, I mean, of course, now we're working virtually. Like I would say the default that we go to when we're working virtually is to not build relationships, right? Like, I mean, I know we feel weird working with people who aren't with us, so we default to talking mostly about work. But if the leader of the team with intention really focuses on both modeling and instructing the team, oh, hey, you guys, at least 10 times a day, you message one another anything on your mind. And the team leader's doing that also. And then also, of course, at the beginning of our Zoom meeting, do we jump right into business, or do we make sure to always have minimum 5 minutes or more of just checking in with one another, laughing? Hey, what happened with your daughter's soccer game, whatever it is. So I really do believe that is something that the leader has a huge amount of control of. Although I am sorry, Jessica, as your writer's new bestie, that I am sorry to say that I think it is very hard to change team culture once it's in place, unless you are like the new leader. Uh-huh. And even the new leader, it's going to be a lot of work because they're already kind of in a habit. So I do suggest that you do talk to your boss about it. It may be that your boss has never even worked in a place where they had that kind of interactions going on virtually. And if you ask for it, if you can, they say, oh yeah, I want that too, right? So yeah, don't give up, but it could be an uphill battle.
I don't disagree.
The theme of loneliness is really important too. I was at my son's house and a bunch of his friends were over. They're all millennials. And they were saying how hard it is when they talk to people who are younger than them, who joined work just remotely. And they're like, this is where you make your friends that are outside of college, right? This is the first time you have pals that you go out to drink with and you get together and talk in the hallway with, or you have your Cheerios with in the morning, right? Whatever it is. And people are, like we talked about earlier, are coming into work without any personal relationships at all. And it's just lonely.
Mm-hmm. It is. And so I think Erin's advice is right, to broach this with your manager and talk to them about it. And, at the end of the day, maybe they are into it too, as Erin said, and they start to change it, or they're not. And then you'll have to decide if this is where you want to work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Choosing a workplace based on the culture that's there. And I know that's super, super difficult because I really don't think, like Netflix is really an exception to this, but most companies, if you ask them what their culture is, you're not going to hear the truth. And people don't even know. It's not that they're lying. It's just that they don't know. So you can't really figure out what the culture is until you start working there.
Yeah.
But there's nothing more important, right?
Yeah, and life is too short. So if it's not giving you joy, get out. And on that note, thank you, Erin, so much. We were thrilled to have you. And, just seeing your face made me happy. So
me too. It's so great to see you again.
We got to catch up.
Yeah,
it's so nice to be with both of you again. You look great. You sound great. And hope that we are face to face next time so I can see your bright eyes.
Yes. Thanks for listening to TruthWorks. This episode was produced and edited by Megan Hayward and Mick Finnegan. Thank you to Kathleen Speckert and the whole Edit Audio team.